Maria had always lived a simple life. She worked long hours at a small diner on the edge of town, trying her best to provide for her 7-year-old son, Daniel. Life was not easy for her. Every paycheck was carefully divided between rent, groceries, school supplies, and the bus fare she needed for work. Even though money was always tight, she carried herself with quiet strength. People in the neighborhood often said she had the kind of smile that made others feel at home. That afternoon, Maria had left work later than usual. The diner had been busy with families stopping by for dinner, and she had stayed behind to wipe down the counters, clean the tables, and stack the chairs. Her feet ached, but she was grateful. Overtime meant she could buy Daniel the new pair of shoes he needed for school. When she finally stepped out into the cool evening air, she carried 2 bags of groceries, a small treat for Daniel hidden inside one of them, a little chocolate bar she knew would make his face light up. Daniel was waiting for her at the babysitter's house. He ran into her arms, his laughter filling her heart with warmth that chased away her tiredness. Together they began the short walk home, chatting about his school day and what he had learned. The street was quiet, the sun low in the sky, painting everything in a soft golden light. Maria felt a rare sense of peace, as if the world had slowed down just for her and her son. But that peace did not last. As they turned the corner toward their street, a patrol car slowly pulled up behind them. The sound of tires against gravel made Maria glance over her shoulder. The flashing lights flickered on, and her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what she had done wrong. She was just walking home with her child, holding bags of food. Still, when the car stopped and the officer stepped out, her body stiffened. Daniel squeezed her hand tighter, sensing his mother's unease. "Mom, why is he stopping us?" he whispered, his small voice trembling with confusion. Maria tried to stay calm for him. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly, forcing a smile. "Maybe he just wants to ask something." The officer walked closer, his face stern and his tone sharp as he began asking questions that felt unnecessary and uncomfortable. He wanted to know where she was coming from, why she was walking at that hour, and what was inside her grocery bags. Maria answered politely, her voice steady, though inside she felt her chest tighten. She had always taught Daniel to respect authority, to stay calm in situations like this, but deep down she felt uneasy. What made it harder was the way the officer looked at her, not as a mother carrying food for her child, not as a woman returning home after a long day of work, but as if she had done something wrong just by existing in that moment. His tone was not the tone of someone ensuring safety, it was the tone of someone trying to make her feel small. Daniel looked up at his mother, his wide eyes searching for reassurance. Maria gently patted his head, trying to comfort him, even as she stood there under the heavy weight of the officer's questions. The minutes felt like hours. Every second stretched out as Maria tried to explain herself again and again. She pointed to the groceries, the receipt still tucked inside the bag. She explained where she worked, even naming the diner and the manager. None of it seemed to matter. The officer continued to press her, his questions circling back to the same things, as if he was trying to catch her in some sort of mistake. Maria's hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. She thought of the long day she had just endured, the sore muscles from standing on her feet, the effort she had put into making sure Daniel had food on the table. And now here she was, standing on the street, being treated as if she were guilty of something she had not done. Her son tugged at her sleeve, whispering again, "Mom, can we go home now?" His words pierced her heart. All she wanted was to take him inside, feed him dinner, and let him fall asleep in peace. But at that moment, she couldn't move. She felt trapped in a situation she had never asked for. What Maria didn't realize was that a few people across the street had stopped to watch. Some had taken out their phones and begun recording. They saw a tired mother with a child being questioned for no clear reason. They saw the discomfort on her face, the way the little boy clung to her side. They saw enough to know that something wasn't right. Maria, however, was too focused on protecting her son to notice the cameras. She answered each question as calmly as she could, her voice gentle, her tone respectful, even though fear bubbled inside her. She knew her son was learning from her in that moment how to handle fear, how to stand with dignity, how to hold on to courage even when the world tried to shake it away. At last, the officer stepped back toward his car, though his eyes still lingered on Maria as if she had done something to offend him. The red and blue lights continued to flash against the evening sky, drawing more attention from the neighborhood. Maria could feel dozens of eyes on her, and she wished she could simply disappear. When the car finally pulled away, leaving her and Daniel standing alone on the sidewalk, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands still shook as she picked up the grocery bags. Daniel looked at her carefully, his young face full of questions he didn't yet know how to ask. Maria crouched down to his level, brushing his hair back gently. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice tender. "We're going home now." She didn't want him to carry her fear. She didn't want him to remember the flashing lights or the stern voice. She wanted him to remember that even in moments like these, love was stronger. As they walked the final stretch to their apartment, Maria's mind replayed the scene over and over. She knew it wasn't fair. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. And yet she had been made to feel powerless in front of her own child. But what she didn't know yet, what she couldn't have imagined, was that the very moment she thought would be forgotten would soon become the start of something much larger. That night, as she tucked Daniel into bed and watched him drift off to sleep with the little chocolate bar resting on his nightstand, Maria promised herself something quietly, that no matter what, she would always protect him, and she would not let this moment break her spirit. She didn't yet know that the next morning her name, her face, and her story would be known all over the city. The night after the incident, Maria hardly slept. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of Daniel's breathing from the next room. Her mind kept replaying the flashing lights, the stern questions, and the way her son's small hand had clutched hers so tightly. She tried to push the memory aside, but it lingered like a shadow she couldn't escape. What she didn't know was that while she struggled to find peace, the community outside her walls was already stirring. The videos recorded by bystanders had begun to spread across social media. People shared them with captions filled with concern and disbelief. Neighbors who knew Maria from the diner recognized her right away. "That's Maria," some whispered. "She works so hard, she's always kind, she doesn't deserve this." By morning, the clips had been viewed thousands of times. Ordinary people, parents, teachers, students, shopkeepers saw what had happened and felt the same uneasiness. Many couldn't believe that a single mom walking home with her child had been treated that way. The sight of Daniel clutching his mother's arm, his innocent eyes watching everything, touched people even more deeply. At the corner store near Maria's building, locals were already talking about it. "Did you see the video?" one customer asked another. "I couldn't believe it. That poor little boy looked so scared." Word spread quickly, faster than Maria could have imagined. While she was fixing breakfast for Daniel and packing his school bag, she had no idea that her name was being spoken across the city. That day, when she walked Daniel to school, she noticed something different. A woman she barely knew stopped her, gently squeezing her arm and whispering, "Stay strong, Maria. We're with you." Maria gave a puzzled smile, not sure how to respond. Another neighbor waved at her from across the street, their expression filled with quiet support. Maria was confused. She didn't realize yet that her story was no longer just her own, it was now part of a larger conversation. By the afternoon, the local news had picked up the story. Reporters began calling it a troubling example of injustice. They showed the video clips on television, with voices narrating what viewers were seeing: a hard-working single mother, holding groceries and walking with her child, suddenly stopped and questioned in a way that felt unnecessary. The footage spoke louder than any words could. In the diner where Maria worked, her co-workers huddled around a small television in the corner. "Isn't that Maria?" one asked, pointing at the screen. "Yes, it's her," another replied softly. Their hearts sank as they watched the scene unfold. They knew how gentle she was, how much she loved her son, and how tirelessly she worked to provide for him. None of them could understand why she had been treated this way. Soon, the community began to act. Small groups of people gathered near the city hall, holding signs that read things like "Justice for Maria" and "Protect families, protect dignity." They weren't shouting or causing chaos, they were standing together peacefully, showing that they cared. Many brought their children, wanting to teach them about standing up for what was right. Meanwhile, Maria remained unaware of just how large the story had grown. That evening, as she helped Daniel with his homework, her phone buzzed with messages. Friends, co-workers, even distant relatives reached out, saying they had seen her on the news. "We're proud of you for staying calm," one wrote. "We're here for you," said another. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't thought of herself as strong that night. She had only tried to shield her son from fear. Yet now, people were calling her brave. Daniel noticed his mother's tears and climbed onto her lap. "Why are you crying, Mom?" he asked gently. Maria hugged him close, whispering, "Because so many kind people care about us." She didn't want him to carry the weight of what had happened. Instead, she wanted him to see the kindness rising from the community. The following morning, Maria woke to find reporters waiting outside her building. They wanted to hear her side of the story. At first, she hesitated. She was not used to cameras or microphones. She was just a mother who wanted to work, raise her son, and live quietly. But then she thought about Daniel, about the frightened look in his eyes that night. If speaking up could help make sure other families didn't go through the same thing, maybe it was worth it. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but full of emotion. "I was only walking home with my child," she said softly. "I didn't do anything wrong. I only wanted to take care of my son. That moment made me feel powerless, but I know I am not alone. I am grateful for everyone who is standing with me." Her words, though simple, touched the hearts of many. The videos, combined with Maria's gentle testimony, became a powerful message. Community leaders began to speak out. Church groups, school boards, and neighborhood associations joined together, calling for fairness and accountability. Even people who didn't know Maria personally felt a connection to her story. They saw her as a symbol of all the parents who work quietly, love their children deeply, and ask only for respect. On social media, her story continued to grow. Hashtags with her name appeared. Families posted pictures of their own walks home with their children, writing, "This could have been us." The movement wasn't about anger, it was about unity, dignity, and the desire for a safer, kinder community. Through it all, Maria tried to remain grounded. She still packed Daniel's lunch each morning, still worked her shifts at the diner, still tucked her son into bed every night. Life continued, but with an added weight she could not ignore. Each time she walked down the street, she noticed strangers smiling at her warmly, sometimes even stopping to say, "We're proud of you." The most powerful moment came a few days later when Maria attended a small gathering at the local park. Families had come together to support her. As she stood there, holding Daniel's hand, she looked around at the faces, young, old, of every background, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She realized that her story was no longer just about one night or one officer. It had become about the strength of a community, about people refusing to stay silent when they saw something wrong. Maria had not asked for attention, but now that it was here, she understood its importance. She looked at her son and whispered, "See, Daniel. When people stand together, good things can happen." That night, as the stars filled the sky, Maria lay in bed thinking about all that had happened. She still felt fear when she remembered the flashing lights, but now that fear was joined by something brighter. She felt the warmth of neighbors, the kindness of strangers, and the strength that comes from people uniting for justice. Maria did not know what would happen next. She did not know that the mayor himself was already preparing to respond. But she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer standing alone. The mayor's office was always busy, but that week felt different. Phones rang non-stop, emails poured in, and messages filled every inbox. The videos of Maria and Daniel were everywhere, on television, on social media, and in the daily conversations of people all across the city. Residents wanted answers. They wanted change. And above all, they wanted fairness. Inside his office, the mayor sat quietly for a moment, watching one of the recordings on a small screen. He saw Maria standing there, clutching her grocery bags, her son holding tightly to her arm. He saw the worry on her face and the confusion in the boy's eyes. The footage spoke louder than words. This wasn't about politics anymore, it was about humanity. The mayor leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He thought about his own children, how he would feel if they had been in Daniel's place. That thought alone made his heart heavy. He knew something had to be done, and it had to be done quickly. Waiting would only allow frustration and sadness to grow stronger among the people. The following morning, he called an emergency meeting with his senior advisors and the city's police chief. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Papers rustled, voices murmured, and the weight of responsibility pressed on everyone present. The mayor's voice, though calm, carried a firmness that silenced the room. "We cannot ignore this," he began. "What happened to that mother and her child was wrong. The whole city has seen it. People are hurting, and they are looking to us for leadership. We must act, not tomorrow, not next week, now." The police chief shifted uncomfortably, acknowledging the seriousness of the incident. "Mayor, the video is clear. The officer's actions crossed the line. We've already begun reviewing his record." The mayor nodded. "That's not enough. The community doesn't just want words or reports. They want action that shows we are serious about fairness and accountability." After a long discussion, a decision was made. The officer would be dismissed immediately. The mayor knew it was a strong step, but he also knew it was the right one. Leadership, he believed, meant doing what was just, even when it was difficult. Later that day, the mayor stood before a group of reporters and community members gathered outside City Hall. Cameras clicked, microphones were raised, and people held their breath, waiting for his words. Behind him, the city's flag fluttered gently in the breeze. "My fellow citizens," the mayor began, his voice steady, "this city belongs to all of us. Every resident deserves to feel safe, respected, and valued. What we witnessed this week does not reflect the principles we stand for. A mother and her child were treated unfairly, and that is unacceptable. Today, I want to make it clear we will not tolerate behavior that threatens the dignity of our community." He paused, letting his words settle over the crowd. Some nodded, others wiped away quiet tears. The mayor continued, "Effective immediately, the officer involved in this incident has been removed from duty. We are also launching new measures to ensure this never happens again. This is not just about one family, it is about every family in the city." The announcement spread like wildfire. News outlets broadcasted it live, and within minutes, people across the city began sharing the message online. Relief washed over many hearts. Parents, workers, and students alike felt that their voices had been heard. For once, it seemed like justice had not been delayed. Maria learned about the decision from a neighbor who rushed to her apartment, excitedly holding up a phone. "Maria, did you hear? The mayor just spoke. The officer has been fired." Maria blinked in surprise, her breath catching in her throat. She had not expected such a quick response. She sat down slowly at her kitchen table, Daniel climbing onto her lap as she listened to the mayor's words on the screen. She held her son close, whispering softly, "Do you hear that, baby? The city cares about us." Daniel looked up at her with wide eyes. "So we're safe now, Mom?" he asked innocently. Maria hugged him tighter. "Yes, my love. We're safe." In that moment, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The fear that had clung to her since that night began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. Across the city, people cheered. At the diner, Maria's co-workers hugged each other with joy. In the park, families who had marched in support of her felt proud that their efforts had made a difference. In living rooms, people watching the news clapped their hands and nodded in approval. The decision was more than just about one officer, it was a promise that fairness mattered. But the mayor did not stop there. Behind the scenes, he instructed his team to begin developing new community programs. He wanted training for officers that focused on empathy, respect, and understanding. He called for open meetings where residents could share their concerns directly with city leaders. He knew that trust was not something that could be rebuilt in a day, but he was determined to start. For Maria, life began to feel a little brighter. Strangers who once passed her on the street without a glance now smiled warmly, some even stopping to say, "We're glad justice was done." Parents at Daniel's school gave her encouraging nods, and even the principal reached out, saying, "You are a role model of calm strength for our children." Maria was humbled. She had not set out to be a symbol of anything. She had only wanted to walk home in peace with her child. Yet somehow, her story had become bigger than her own life. It was now a reminder of what could happen when a community stood together and when leaders listened with open hearts. At night, as she tucked Daniel into bed, Maria reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the mayor's words, the swift decision, and the support of neighbors she barely knew before. For the first time in days, she slept with a lighter heart, knowing that her city had chosen to stand by her side. In another part of the city, the mayor sat at his desk, long after the cameras had left and the offices had grown quiet. He knew his work was not finished. One decision could not erase years of challenges, but he also knew it was a beginning. He looked out at the skyline and whispered to himself, "This is the city I want my children to grow up in. A city where every family feels safe." And so, a story that began with flashing lights on a quiet street had now reached the highest office in the city. A single moment had sparked a wave of change, reminding everyone that dignity, respect, and justice were not just words, they were promises that had to be kept. Maria never thought of herself as someone who would speak in front of a crowd. She was used to long shifts at the diner, keeping her head down, working hard, and returning home to care for Daniel. Public speaking, microphones, and cameras were far from her world. Yet after the mayor's announcement, people began asking her to share her side of the story. They wanted to hear not only what had happened that night but also how it felt. At first, she hesitated. She worried about what to say, or if her words would even matter. "I'm just a mother," she told her neighbor. But her neighbor replied with a smile, "Sometimes the voice of a mother can be more powerful than anything else." That thought stayed with Maria. She looked at Daniel and realized he had already seen her stand tall in a difficult moment. Perhaps sharing her feelings openly would show him that even in fear, truth could shine. The first time Maria spoke publicly was at a small community meeting in the basement of a church. The room was filled with folding chairs, the scent of coffee, and people from all walks of life. Some had signs that said, "We stand with Maria." Others simply carried notebooks, ready to listen. Maria sat in the front row, her hands trembling slightly as she waited. When the organizer finally called her to the stage, Maria stood slowly, smoothing her simple dress and taking a deep breath. Daniel sat in the audience, his little legs swinging from a chair too big for him, his eyes wide with pride. Seeing him gave her courage. She stepped up to the microphone, her voice soft at first. "I never thought I would stand here today," she began. The room grew silent, every ear tuned to her words. "I am just a mother. I go to work, I buy groceries, I help my son with his homework, and I try my best each day. That night, I was only walking home with him. I didn't expect anything unusual. But in just a few minutes, everything changed." Maria paused, her throat tightening as memories of the flashing lights filled her mind. She looked down at her hands, then back up at the crowd. "In that moment, I felt small. I felt powerless. But I also knew I had to stay strong for my son. I didn't want him to remember fear. I wanted him to remember that his mother stood with dignity." Her voice grew steadier as she continued. "What I learned is that none of us are truly alone. I didn't know people across the city were watching, caring, and standing with me. I didn't realize that neighbors I barely knew would speak up for me. And I didn't know that my story would matter to so many people. But it did. And for that, I am deeply thankful." When she finished, the room erupted into applause. People stood from their seats, clapping with tears in their eyes. Some rushed forward to hug her, whispering words of encouragement. Maria felt a warmth spread through her heart. For the first time, she realized that her experience could inspire others to speak out too. Over the next few weeks, Maria was invited to more gatherings. She spoke at schools, community centers, and neighborhood forums. Each time, she grew more confident. She didn't use fancy words or rehearsed speeches. She spoke simply, from the heart, about her love for her son, her fear that night, and the strength she found in the community's support. At one school event, a young girl raised her hand and asked shyly, "Miss Maria, were you scared?" Maria smiled gently and nodded. "Yes, I was very scared. But sometimes, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are." The children in the room nodded, their eyes shining with understanding. Daniel, too, began to see his mother in a new light. He would sit proudly in the front row at every event, clapping the loudest when she finished speaking. One evening, as she tucked him into bed, he whispered, "Mom, you're like a hero." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm just your mom. But maybe that's enough." Her words began to ripple outward. Women who had quietly endured unfair treatment found the courage to share their own experiences. Fathers spoke about wanting safer streets for their children. Teenagers posted online, saying, "Maria's story reminds us to stand up for kindness." Slowly, a wave of honesty and hope spread across the city. Local newspapers published her speeches, calling her a voice of grace. Radio hosts invited her to speak about dignity and courage. Even small businesses began supporting her, offering free meals or helping with Daniel's school supplies. Maria never asked for these things, but the kindness of strangers reminded her again and again that she was not alone. Through it all, Maria remained humble. She still worked at the diner, wiping tables and greeting customers with her warm smile. But even there, things changed. Customers would come just to say, "Thank you for speaking up." Some would slip encouraging notes onto the counter with their tips. One note read, "Your story gave me hope on a hard day. Keep shining." Maria kept it folded in her apron pocket, touching it whenever she felt doubt. One evening, she was invited to a larger city forum where hundreds of people gathered. The mayor was present, along with community leaders and local families. As Maria walked to the stage, she felt a wave of nervousness. But then she remembered Daniel's proud face, and her fear melted into determination. She began her speech the way she always did, with honesty. "I never chose for my story to be shared so widely. But I believe things happen for a reason. If my experience can help even one person feel less alone, then it is worth it." If it can make the city a little kinder for our children, then it is worth it. And if my voice, as simple as it is, can remind leaders to listen with compassion, then it is worth it. The audience gave her a standing ovation. The mayor himself approached her afterward, shaking her hand and thanking her for her courage. "You have reminded us of what truly matters," he said sincerely. As Maria walked home that night with Daniel skipping happily at her side, she realized something important. She had started as a woman who simply wanted to protect her child from fear. But now, she was part of something larger, a movement of hope, unity, and strength. The once quiet mother had found her voice. And with every word she spoke, she carried not just her own story, but the stories of many others who had long stayed silent. She had become a symbol of resilience, showing that even the softest voice could echo loudly when spoken with truth. The city did not forget what happened to Maria and Daniel. In fact, their story became a turning point. What began as one difficult evening on a quiet street grew into something much bigger, a reminder that fairness, kindness, and dignity should always come first. Weeks passed, and the mayor kept his promise. Training sessions for officers began, focused not only on rules but also on understanding people, listening with respect, and treating every resident with care. Community meetings were held more often, giving citizens a chance to speak directly to leaders. People who once felt invisible started to believe their voices could matter. For Maria, life slowly returned to normal, though in many ways, it would never be the same. She still worked long hours at the diner, still helped Daniel with his homework, and still stretched every paycheck to cover their needs. But there was something new now. People looked at her differently. Customers at the diner called her strong. Neighbors smiled at her warmly. Even strangers who recognized her from the news would stop to say, "Thank you for standing tall." Maria always answered humbly. "I only did what any mother would do," she would say. Yet deep inside, she knew she had grown stronger. She had learned that sometimes life places us in difficult moments not because we seek them, but because others need to see how courage looks in real life. Daniel, too, had changed. He was only 7, but he carried the memory of that night. At first, he had nightmares, waking in the middle of the night and calling for his mother. Maria would sit by his bed, stroking his hair, whispering, "You're safe, my love. Everything is all right now." Over time, his fear faded, replaced by pride. At school, when his classmates asked about the news, he would sit a little taller and say, "That's my mom. She's brave." One afternoon, his teacher sent a note home, saying that Daniel had spoken in class about standing up for kindness. He told the other children, the note read, that even when you're scared, you can choose to be brave. Maria read the words with tears in her eyes. She realized that the most important lesson from everything that happened was not just for the city, it was for her son. He had seen firsthand that dignity was stronger than fear, and that when people stood together, good could overcome wrong. The city itself began to reflect this new spirit. In parks, in schools, and in workplaces, people talked more openly about fairness and respect. Community events celebrated diversity, and children painted murals with messages of unity and hope. One mural near Daniel's school showed a mother holding her child's hand beneath a sky full of bright stars. At the bottom, in colorful letters, it said, "We stand together." Maria visited the mural one evening with Daniel. He stared at it with wide eyes, then looked up at her. "It looks like us, Mom," he whispered. Maria smiled softly, her heart swelling with both pride and humility. "Maybe it is, sweetheart. Maybe it is." She had never imagined being seen as a symbol. To her, she was just a mother doing her best. But as time went on, she accepted that sometimes ordinary people become symbols without trying, simply by living with honesty and courage. The mayor invited her once more to City Hall, this time not for a press conference but for a small private meeting. He wanted to thank her personally, not as a leader but as a parent. Sitting across the table from her, he said, "Maria, you reminded us of what truly matters. You reminded us that leadership is about protecting families, about making sure children grow up in a city that values them. You gave the city a gift." Maria shook her head gently. "I didn't give anything, Mayor. I only did what I had to. The gift came from the people who stood up and cared." The mayor smiled. "Perhaps that's true. But your story lit the spark." News of reforms continued to spread, and journalists often referred back to Maria's story when writing about positive changes in the city. Even months later, her name would come up in community discussions. Yet Maria never let it change who she was. She still lived in her modest apartment, still counted her coins carefully, still found joy in simple things like baking bread with Daniel on Sunday mornings or reading him bedtime stories under the soft glow of a lamp. But she noticed something new in herself, a calm confidence she hadn't felt before. She no longer carried fear when she walked home at night. She held her head high, knowing that her community had shown her love, and her leaders had chosen to act with justice. One summer evening, at a community celebration in the park, Maria was asked to speak again. She stood under strings of lights, with families sitting on blankets and children running barefoot in the grass. Her voice was warm as she said, "We are here tonight because of something simple, because we care for each other. My story began with fear, but it became a story of hope, because of all of you. This city has shown me that when we stand together, we can turn even painful moments into something meaningful. We are not perfect, but we are stronger when we choose kindness." The crowd applauded, and Daniel clapped the loudest, his little hands echoing through the evening air. He ran to her after the speech, hugging her tightly. "Mom," he said proudly, "you're helping everyone." Maria smiled, kissing the top of his head. "No, Daniel," she whispered, "we're helping each other." The celebration continued with music, laughter, and the smell of food filling the park. Maria watched as children of all backgrounds played together, chasing fireflies under the night sky. She felt a deep sense of peace. Her heart knew that even though the journey had been hard, it had led to something beautiful. In the quiet of that night, as she walked home with Daniel holding her hand, Maria reflected on everything. She thought about the night of flashing lights, about the fear that once weighed her down. She thought about the neighbors who stood up, the strangers who cared, and the leaders who listened. And most of all, she thought about her son, who had learned that courage could rise even in the darkest of moments. Maria realized her life would never return to the way it was before. But she also knew she wouldn't want it to. Because now, she was more than just a mother trying to survive each day. She was a voice of hope, a reminder that even ordinary people can inspire extraordinary change. As she tucked Daniel into bed that night, he asked softly, "Mom, will people always remember our story?" Maria smiled, brushing his hair back gently. "Maybe they will, Daniel. But even if they don't, what matters most is that you remember the lesson. That kindness is powerful, that standing together makes us stronger, and that no matter what happens, we always choose love." Daniel nodded sleepily, closing his eyes with a smile. Maria kissed his forehead, whispering, "Good night, my brave boy." And as the city outside continued to move forward, building new bridges of trust, teaching children the importance of respect, and carrying with it the memory of one mother's quiet courage, Maria lay down with peace in her heart. Her story was no longer just about what happened one night. It had become a story of change, of hope, and of a city that learned to walk together toward a brighter tomorrow.